Graham Malgod Cahirlock, and I speak to the Microenterprise bill, which is, I understand, due to conclude today. And I'm glad to support this bill. I'm glad to commend it to the House. I just want to take a moment to recognise the new surroundings and the amphitheatre that we find ourselves in, and just to pay tribute to the Ceann Comhairle and to the Oireachtas staff and team that are behind this great new venture that we find ourselves embarking on. I did think, if I ever imagined myself addressing such an auditorium, that I might have had a somewhat wider, a larger audience in attendance, but such is the swings and arrows, and here we are. At least we can do our business and get on with it, and indeed that's what we're doing today. This bill is one of the many vital pieces of legislation which is being addressed and introduced by the new government, and I think it highlights and crystallises just why we needed that government and why it was of the essence that actually we did put a government in place after the long hiatus of talks and COVID and the pandemic and everything else, but the political fates that were aligning, I think it made it all the more imperative that we did indeed get a government in place, that this type of initiative, this type of bill could get into the chamber, could get time and could get passed. And I wish that new government well. I think it's important to note as well that that new government, despite perhaps some claims to the contrary at the outset, enjoys a solid majority. I know there was upwards of 30 TDs in excess of a majority on the day the Taoiseach Micheál Martin was appointed to office. And I think on any metric, whether it be votes, whether it be seats, whether it be percentages, on any metric the government enjoys an overwhelming majority, certainly a mathematical majority of the House, of the electorate, of popular support, and every other metric. And it is important that exists so, and that exists, and that all of us get on with it and get on with the job of supporting that government and supporting its important work and measures to tackle items like this. And as I said, this is one of the many priority items that I think was so important that we saw introduced. Onto the business of the bill itself. First, I want to pay tribute to the resilience of so many, particularly the small and medium enterprises, particularly the small businesses in all our towns and villages and constituencies that have somehow survived. And some of them survive it is still an open question, but those that have got to this point, those that have actually got through thus far the pandemic, and in many cases, those that reinvented themselves very successfully and very inventively and ingenuously in their own ways. I marvelled at the rapid response in my own constituency and indeed around the country. It was mirrored, where we had a very unique situation at the height of the pandemic and the height of lockdown, where we had individuals cooped up in their own homes and private houses for weeks and indeed months on end, and we had at the same time we had suppliers of goods and services that were of great interest to those same individuals behind closed doors, in warehouses, in depots, in corner stores and everywhere else. And it seemed it didn't take a huge leap of faith or imagination to connect the two. And I was delighted, actually, my colleague, Deputy Now Minister Robert Troy, spearheaded in terms of writing to the Department of Enterprise at the time to try to advance, I suppose, that certainty that was needed, that businesses could begin to trade online and businesses could begin to trade over the phone in remote fashion. And indeed, that did get up and going quite quickly in the end. And of course, also on Post and the delivery services, and indeed the courier firms played a part in that kind of online fulfilment as well. But it was remarkable to see the speed at which local retailers really embraced it once it was clear that that was kosher to do so. And we had, I know my own constituency, Ted Johnson's Hardware in Naas, a very popular family-run business, old traditional business, mobilised and led to a situation where the clerks and the tellers and the store staff were taking orders over the phone until lunchtime every morning, manning the phones literally in every sense, and then on the road in a van that afternoon, delivering their wares, which were highly in demand around the area, fulfilling that need, keeping them in business, keeping them and their staff in jobs, and fulfilling that supply chain. And tackling, and businesses like that, for the first time embracing this sort of new remote world, and tackling things like supply chain, like logistics, like order fulfilment, like payment, those sort of nuts and bolts of remote delivery and large-scale supply chain management. And in the space of time it took a Harvard business paper to come off the printer, they had it invented and reinvented in their own storeroom. So I pay huge tribute to businesses like that and those like them. I think it's important I talked about survival, and this is about survival for very many businesses. I think it was Darwin that said that it is not always in life, and in every sense, it is not always the strongest or the biggest that would survive. It is those that are most adaptable to change. And I think our retailers, our small retailers, really demonstrated and lived that value during the pandemic in the way that they proved adaptable, that they changed, they changed course and remodelled their own offerings. And again, I pay a huge tribute to them for doing that. I think it's also on a note of more caution, perhaps, or more concern. I think while we embrace that, I think the online trading voucher has been talked about. Now, Deputy Dennis Naughton mentioned it in an earlier part of this debate, and it was one thing that came to my attention during the pandemic as well. The online trading voucher support scheme appears to have ran dry. And that is of great concern for those businesses who have reinvented themselves, who are throwing the shoulder to the wheel to try to get out there and serve their customers and keep their businesses afloat and their staff in jobs. The trading voucher scheme appears to, which is a scheme to enable businesses to get online, to give them that support, mentoring and finance to get online, appears to have ran dry. And I would appeal to the ministers and anybody in a position of power in that area that this is something that must be looked at, because we cannot say to businesses at the height of the pandemic, at a time when we're encouraging everybody to embrace the remote distribution channels, to say, well, last year's allocation is used up, and that's it, wait till next year. I don't think that's good enough, and I do hope and I do expect that I will be confident that that will be tackled. But I just want to put that to the department. On the bricks and mortar and the people who cannot do business online, we're all very familiar now with the Zoom calls and with the online chats and the Skype chats and everything else. And a lot of businesses have been done that way, and a lot of socialising is being done that way, and a lot of amenities are being done that way. People are having casual, what might have been the summer school season, as we're embarking upon now, our conferences or other get-togethers. A lot of that is transitioned to online, which is great in the sense that it continues and it prevails, and those discussions take place. It's not such great news for the coffee shops and the pubs and the restaurants and the hotels, etc., that were in around that. That's a part of those kind of initiatives, because you can't buy a cup of coffee on a Zoom call. You can't go in and have your meal with other delegates coming out of an online conference, and that's a concern. And it's a concern right across the country. But I think we've seen a lot of focus on staycations, and we've seen a lot of focus on people maybe going down the country, and I applaud that, and I think people should do that. But let's not forget Dublin, and let's not forget the commuter belt, and let's not forget our day-to-day businesses. And as local example, as the Petite Cafe across the road from Leinster House, I was speaking to the management yesterday, and I know they're having huge trouble because the footfall that normally generates from the city centre, from the museums, from the galleries, from the public buildings, not to mention the commercial activity, is just not there. So we need to find a way to put that back into put feedback on the street in a safe way, but in a way that can support businesses to survive. I also want to pay tribute to the retailers, because the retailers the supermarkets and the shops and the convenience stores kept going through the pandemic, and those retailers and their staff put themselves literally on the front line, and they were frontline workers and frontline heroes. I think it's important that they be recognised as such. Gerlach, I'm not sure in terms of time. And then, so I'm going to conclude my 10 minutes, and then I'm going to yield to my colleague. But I just want to quote the Kildare Chamber of Commerce, indeed, as with many chambers of commerce and many business associations in the country, are very concerned about this. This bill is to be welcomed, this channel of finance coming in now to the small businesses, and indeed anyone that wishes to avail of it. It will be a lifeblood. It's not a panacea, but it's not a silver bullet, but it is certainly a very, very useful measure and very important one. I just want to note the findings of the Kildare Chamber of Commerce survey. First, they noted that there are 10,000 active enterprises in Kildare. There are 50,000 workers across the commercial, trade and professional services industries, with an 88% employment rate prior to the emergency. Businesses are very concerned. Activity levels are extremely low. Less than half, and I think less than half is even an optimistic figure, of the usual activity was presenting. Earnings have dropped between 60% and more. 25% of businesses expect to have earnings less than 70% of usual. So that's a quarter of businesses will not even make 30% of their usual revenue. And that decline has been felt most strongly in the regions, including in the east. And again, it's the smaller operators who don't have the reserves, who don't have the ecosystem, who don't have the perhaps cash flow, who are seeing significantly disproportionate impact. Those micro-enterprises, those small businesses, those family-run businesses in many cases need support. This microfinance bill is a part of the solution. I wish it well. I encourage everybody to apply for it and draw it down as a support to their businesses, and I commend the government for introducing it.